Week 4 of the fantasy football season. His wide receiver starts at every matchup this week. Thursday night, Arizona Cardinals at the Seattle Seahawks. Marvin Harrison to start for me in this one. I know Marvin Harrison, the numbers haven't been good besides week 1. We went over 80 yards, found the end zone. In the last 2 weeks, he's failed to reach double-digit points in PPR leagues. But one more chance I'm going to give Marvin Harrison Jr. this week. And I think he could go out there and have a good game because we know Thursday night football, obviously high-scoring games usually, and a division matchup as well where some key plays are going to have to be made. And Marvin, he did have 2 drops in last week's ball game as well versus San Francisco 49ers. So I think Harrison bounces back. Like I said, Thursday night, division game, and he's a start this week. Jackson Smith-Njigba emerging as one of the best receivers in fantasy football. Another big week. Last week in the blowout victory versus the Saints, 5 for 96 and a touchdown. And this week versus a mediocre Cardinal defense, obviously a start. Cooper Kupp, a fringe option so far, 2 out of 3 games. He hasn't done much as Cooper Kupp. Obviously his best years are behind him, but I still think he's a wide receiver that could go out there, make plays, and have some pop games here and there. But this week versus Arizona, can't have a lot of trust in Kupp. He's a fringe option. Minnesota Vikings at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Justin Jefferson, he's a start each and every week. I know so far this year he really hasn't had the big game, but to start the year, all 3 games, double-digit fantasy games in PPR leagues. Last week, they got off to a hot start with the defense carrying them to victory with this Minnesota Viking team, where it was a 5 for 75 type of day for Justin Jefferson versus the Bengals. But we know Carson Wentz is a gunslinger, and I think Jefferson, he's due for a big game, and it could be this week in Dublin versus the Steelers. Jordan Addison coming off suspension. We have to see what he's going to do in this ball game. He's got to get used to Carson Wentz, obviously, where they don't have much time together, where Wentz signed right before the season. And also as well, anytime a guy comes off a suspension, I want to take a wait-and-see approach or injury, depending on the situation. If they're out there on a lot of snaps or on a snap count. So with those factors and Carson Wentz having no rapport with Jordan Addison with barely any practice time, he's a fringe option. Adam Thielen is it. Adam Thielen, it was a decent trade to add a guy back to Minnesota where he's had his best career years, obviously from Carolina. But Thielen, the first 3 weeks of the season, pretty much he's done nothing. He's a sit. DK Metcalf a start. Him and Rodgers have good rapport. The only thing with Metcalf, yes, this season he's scoring touchdowns, but the yards really haven't been there, especially the last 2 weeks. But obviously he's the number 1 target, and anytime we've seen the number 1 target with Aaron Rodgers as their quarterback, they usually go out there and they're productive for fantasy football. Calvin Austin, definitely a fantasy option, but not someone I'm going to trust week in and week out right away is Calvin Austin. 2 out of 3 weeks he has found the end zone for the Steelers team, and they're looking for someone who emerge as the number 2 option in the passing game. So Austin definitely could be that, but I still have to see a little bit more. He's a sit. New Orleans Saints at the Buffalo Bills. Chris Olave a start. The only thing with Olave, I've said, injuries have been a problem for him over the last few seasons, and pretty much his ceiling's capped. Even with all these targets he's been getting in the first 3 weeks of the season, he is Chris Olave. He's going to be a guy where the ceiling's going to be capped out. He's going to get a lot of double teams with safety over the top as well, where they're going to force Spencer Rattler to go other ways on the field, either Jawan Johnson or Rashid Shaheed. But Chris Olave with his targets and someone who could be a decent 3 flex option for fantasy owners in a game where they're going to be chasing points early and often, I'd give him the start. Rashid Shaheed is it. First 2 weeks of the year, pretty good numbers. Last week, 4 catches, 42 yards. It was for Shaheed in the blowout loss at the Seattle Seahawks. But like I said, consistency has been a problem for Shaheed. And this offense, it's tough to trust someone to go out there week in and week out besides Kamara and Olave at times to put up fantasy numbers. Now to the Bills, Keon Coleman to start, Khalil Shakir start. I know Coleman had the big game, over 100 yards, found the end zone in that one versus the Ravens in week 1, but the last 2 weeks, numbers have dropped off. But this week in a plus matchup versus a bad defense, he's a start. Khalil Shakir last week found the end zone in that one versus the Dolphins. He's one of the better possession wide receivers in the league, good hands, and him and Allen have good rapport. And I always say this in the videos, there's really not a 1A or number 2 option in this offense. Allen's the quarterback that's going to spread it out and throw the football to 9 different players on his team. So both these players in a great matchup of starts. Joshua Palmer is it. I know he signed a decent contract in the offseason, but consistency hasn't been there for Palmer. He's the 4th or 5th option in this offense behind Cook, Keon Coleman, Shakir, and Dalton Kincaid. Tennessee Titans at the Houston Texans, another division matchup. Calvin Ridley is sit for me. Ridley's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points in the first 3 games of the season, and this week he's going to most likely draw one of the best corners in the league on him in this one in Derek Stingley. So with those factors, and him and Cam Ward really don't have rapport, and Calvin Ridley hasn't done much. He's a sit. Alec Ayomain, the rookie so far, 2 games he's found the end zone, but we have to see a little bit more out of him. He's a touchdown-dependent type of wide receiver so far, and like I said, if he's not scoring a touchdown, the numbers would have been mediocre, but definitely someone to be rostered in 10, 12-team leagues is Ayomain, but not someone I have confidence in starting this week. Nico Collins, stud receiver. He's a start each and every week, and the only consistent option on this whole offense is Nico Collins. The last 2 games he found the end zone. Last week, over 100 yards found the end zone, and this week in a good matchup versus Tennessee, it could be a big game for him. Christian Kirk is it. Came back from the 2-game he missed week 1 and 2 with injury was Kirk with the hamstring injury. And last week, he didn't do much, but he did have 8 targets, 5 catches, 34 yards. It was for Christian Kirk, but obviously you got to see a lot out of him before you have confidence putting him in the lineup every week. Cleveland Browns at the Detroit Lions, Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman. It's just not enough consistency as well with these guys. I know Jerry Jeudy last season had a monster year, 1,200 yards, double-digit touchdowns, 90 catches, but this season, pretty much a low ceiling it's been for him, obviously with Joe Flacco. And there's a lot of guys on this offense, David Njoku, Harold Fannin Jr., the rookies emerged a little bit early on. And then the guy I'm going to mention now, Cedric Tillman, had first 2 good weeks, and then last week he didn't do much, where this matchup's going to be tough. I think Detroit, we just saw them go into Baltimore, and their defense harassed Lamar Jackson all game long. Got to him early and often, 7 sacks in that one. And Zay Flowers, he didn't do anything in that game. I know Bateman had a touchdown, but this Detroit Lion defense starting to come into its own a little bit, and it's going to be a tough matchup for Jeudy and Tillman to have great upside. I'm on Ross St. Brown, start each and every week. Top 5 receiver, in my opinion, in fantasy football. Last week, tough matchup with Marlon Humphrey on him, 7 for 77, found the end zone. And this week, Denzel Ward, most likely is going to draw in this game, but he's a matchup-proof receiver. Like I said, Jameson Williams, a fringe option. I know Jamo's way better at home than he is on the road. We're on that fast track indoors. He burns a lot of secondaries. We've seen it over the last season and change for Jameson Williams, but he's a deep ball and nothing type of wideout. So this week, he's a fringe option to me. Washington Commanders at the Falcons. Deebo Samuel will start. I know last week he came back down to earth with only 4.9 fantasy points in PPR leagues is Deebo Samuel, but I think he could create some separation and make plays in this game. And this Atlanta Falcon defense last week, I just don't know what happened. 30 points, and they got shut out 30-0. I know Michael Penix didn't put their defense in a good spot with some turnovers in that game, but I think Deebo Samuel could bounce back on the fast track this week at Atlanta. And Terry McLaurin now, he's dealing with a quadricep injury. We'll see if he plays in this game, and if he plays, I would give him the nod. After what I saw last week from this Falcon defense, and if Jaden Daniels returns to the lineup, both these receivers in a good matchup, I would start Drake London to start. So far, he's been underwhelming his numbers, and it's not his fault. Michael Penix, he just can't be accurate, and him and London aren't on the same page. At least London, the first 3 weeks, he's not totally been a bust. He's had 2 games with double-digit fantasy points out of the first 3. Last season was a big year, 100 catches, over 1,200 yards for London. And maybe they make a quarterback change, maybe they don't. Is this Falcon team, but in this matchup, even versus a good Commander defense, I would start him. Darnell Mooney is it. Pretty much the only guys on this offense I have confidence in weekly right now is obviously Bijan Robinson and Drake London. Mooney last year had a nice year as the number 2 wide receiver. And like I said, if Kirk Cousins does come back as the starter for this team, if Michael Penix, they got to bench him and could learn a bit more on the sidelines, I think everyone's value goes up over there in Atlanta. Philadelphia Eagles at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A.J. Brown finally had the breakout game. And this Eagle team, I just feel like they don't have urgency to throw the football a whole lot when the games are close, or if obviously they have a big lead, they're just going to run with Barkley and Hurts. But last week when they were down 3 scores versus the Rams, they came rumbling back, and Jalen Hurts once again proved a lot of people wrong. When he's got to throw, he's going to go out there and make the plays and get it to his playmakers. And A.J. Brown broke a lot of tackles in last week's game. So Brown, in a matchup where this could be high scoring in Tampa Bay, he's a start. Devonta Smith finally had a big game, even though I don't think he's going to be a consistent option weekly is Devonta, but this Tampa secondary is banged up. It's not that great of a secondary. We saw Garrett Wilson go out there, have a big game against him. We saw Nico Collins a couple weeks ago have a big game versus defense. So the secondary is definitely leaky, and I think both these receivers can have a good game. Mike Evans, hamstring injury. We'll see if he's going to play. So far, not a full diagnosis with Evans. It's a day-to-day type of thing, but it wouldn't be surprising to me if he misses this game. Is Evans. Last season, he had the hamstring injury. He missed 3 games, and this week versus Philadelphia, good secondary. Like I said, I think this could be a high-scoring game between these teams. So if Evans is in and good to go, he's a start. And Emeka Egbuka, so far, the first 3 games of his professional career, he's been one of the better wide receivers and consistent guys in fantasy football, and he's a start as well. Him and Baker are locked in. Emeka Egbuka, he can run all the routes, work the middle of the field, work the sidelines, and he's got great yard after catch prowess. So this week, I like both these receivers. Chris Godwin, there's a good chance he plays in this game, but like I said early in the video with Addison, I got to see a guy coming off an injury. He's missed a lot of time going to last season or suspension to see if he's in shape and ready to go. And like I said, with Egbuka and Mike Evans over here in Tampa Bay, some of these snaps are going to be cut for Godwin, where they might ease him back into the lineup. But obviously, if Evans is out, then Egbuka and Chris Godwin are both going to be starters for this Buc team. But this week, he's a fringe option to me, is Godwin. Carolina Panthers at the Patriots, Tatora McMillan, he's a start for me. Last week was his worst game so far in the first 3 weeks, but they were up early and often, and they ran the clock out in the second half with this Carolina Panther team. So this week in New England, I think it's a grinded out close game where these teams, in my opinion, are similar in a way, where I think New England's a little bit better, but this game's going to be close. And Ted McMillan, he's just a matchup problem with his height, speed, and his route running ability. Hunter Renfrow was hit a couple weeks ago. He had a big game at Arizona, finding the end zone twice. And then last week, he didn't do nothing versus the Falcons. So he's not a wide receiver you're going to trust weekly. He's a sit. Stephon Diggs, Keyshawn Botte, Demario Douglas all sits. Right now, it looks like Hunter Henry obviously is the number 1 option after coming off a 90 receiving yard game and 2 touchdowns last week in the tough loss versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. And these wide receivers, they'll have sporadic numbers here and there. Diggs, I don't think he's totally up to snuff with the playbook in his first season with New England. And also, he's not 100% with the ACL. Botte had a good week 1, hasn't done much since. And Demario Douglas as well, if he's not getting a touchdown, he's not going to have value. Los Angeles Chargers at the Giants, Ladd McConkey, Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston, all starts. All these wide receivers, especially Keenan and Johnston, have had better years so far than Ladd McConkey, where Quentin Johnston, he's fixed his drop problem for now. From last season, he dropped a lot of passes. His route running is crisper. And Justin Herbert's locked in with Johnston, and Keenan Allen and Herbert, they've been locked in for years, even with a year away, getting traded to the Bears last season and coming back. Keenan Allen's back to form and putting up numbers. And this week in a matchup with a bad New York Giants secondary that can't stop anyone, these guys are all starts. And I think Ladd McConkey could have one of his bigger games of the year and a bounce back coming off a slow start so far. Malik Neighbors a start. Last week, Malik Neighbors, he took a big pop in the back of the end zone, and I thought he was going to knock him out of the game and maybe multiple games. The hit he took on that collision in the back of the end zone was Neighbors. But right now, this week, it's going to be a matchup they're going to be trailing early and often. We'll see if it's Russell Wilson or Jackson Dart for this New York Giant team, where Brian Daboll said they're still evaluating to see who the quarterback is. But Neighbors, he's quarterback proof. We saw it last season with a bunch of backups, Drew Lock, Daniel Jones in the beginning part of the season, even though now Daniel Jones has figured things out over there in Indianapolis. And also Tommy DeVito, so Neighbors, after coming off a bad game where him and Wilson couldn't get going, and McDuffie, one of the better corners in the league, were on him. I think this week bounces back. Wandale Robinson is it. I know he had the monster game week 2 versus the Cowboys, 8 for 142, and found the end zone. But consistency isn't there in this offense. Neighbors and Cam Scatterbo pretty much are the only 2 guys I think you could trust week in and week out. Jaguars at the Niners, Brian Thomas Jr., I'm going to give him a start one more time. Last week, another game, he didn't do much as Brian Thomas. He had a nice one big catch in that game, working on a vertical route, but besides that, he's been non-existent in this offense. Guys like Dami Brown, Brenton Strange have been more consistent than Brian Thomas after he came off a monster rookie year. But this week at San Francisco, where I think they'll be chasing points, he's a star. Travis Hunter, a sit. We just don't know what Hunter's going to be. They're playing both sides of the ball with Hunter right now. is Jacksonville, where I think they got to focus on one thing to get the most out of him. Like 1 week, maybe play with receiver, then the other week corner. But if he's playing both sides of the ball, obviously he's going to be limited offensively on snap count. And not going to be an option. Ricky Pierce or Juwan Jennings, their starts. I don't think this secondary, even if they got Hunter back there, is going to do much versus San Francisco 49er team. And it looks like Brock Purdy's going to return as well to the starting lineup. So all of a sudden, San Francisco getting a little bit healthy. They're off to a great start to start the year. And both these wide receivers, we've already seen big games out of them. And PSO last week, Indianapolis Colts at the Los Angeles Rams. Michael Pittman, I know the first 2 out of 3 weeks he's gone out there, had big games as Pittman, but I still have to see a little bit more, I think, from Pittman. So this week in a tougher matchup versus a Los Angeles Ram defense that's been good for the most part, besides last week where the Eagles came back from 3 scores and won the ball game. I think Michael Pittman, he's a situational wide receiver. If it's a plus matchup, yes, you start him, but this week in a mediocre matchup to poor, he's a fringe option. Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, they're both sits downs. We haven't seen anything from him so far this season. And Alec Pierce, he made a couple big plays in last week's ball game, but now he's in concussion protocol, so he might not even play in this game regardless. He's the number 3 wide receiver and 5th option on this offense. He's a sit. Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, not much to say. Both these guys are stud wide receivers. Puka Nacua, one of the better receivers, obviously, in fantasy football. And Devontae Adams, 2 out of 3 weeks with his new team, he's found the end zone and he's a start. And him and Stafford are locked in. Chicago Bears at the Raiders. This could be an underrated high-scoring game between these two teams. Rome Odunze, number 1 option in this passing game. Him and Caleb Williams have good rapport going back to last season. He's found the end zone every week, as well as Odunze in the early going this year. He's a must-start at a bad Raiders secondary. DJ Moore, fringe option. Last week, the touchdown saved his day, or would have been 3 weeks in a row to start the year for DJ Moore. Not scoring double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. So this week, even in the plus matchup at the Vegas Raiders, he's a fringe option. Luther Burden III, he's a sit. I know he had a monster game last week, 3 catches, 101 yards, a touchdown. But we have to see more route participation and more snaps for Luther Burden before he's a start or even a fringe option. So definitely someone to roster in 12-team leagues or deeper. But like I said, you have to see more production and more participation from him. He's a sit. Jacoby Myers, and yes, Trey Tucker, I'm going to give him the starting nod in this ball game. So Myers, number 1 receiver in this offense. Obviously, Brock Bowers, the number 1 target overall on this offense for this Vegas Raider team. But Jacoby Myers, he can run the routes, good yard after catch guy. And this Raider team, they've been trailing early and often all season where they got to throw a whole lot. So volume might be there, even though this is going to be a close game between these two teams. And Trey Tucker, coming off a monster game last week, over 140 yards, found the end zone 3 times. He's a big deep ball threat. I know the first 2 weeks, numbers weren't really there, but this week versus a leaky secondary of the Chicago Bears with Jalen Johnson out, I think Trey Tucker could go out there and could be a decent option. Him and Geno are locked in. And we know Geno, going back to his Seattle days, he likes having that big deep ball threat. And Trey Tucker right now is that deep ball threat where they were looking for someone else to emerge after Amari Cooper retired. And Trey Tucker could be that guy for this Raider team. Baltimore Ravens at the Chiefs. This matchup every year is a great anticipated matchup between these two teams, either regular season and playoffs. And Zay Flowers, he's a start for me. Last week, they just couldn't get anything going with Zay Flowers, and Mark Andrews was the number 1 target in the offense with 91 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. So Flowers coming off a 2 for 13 ball game. I still have confidence to put him out there in the starting lineup, even though he's most likely going to get McDuffie on him the majority of the game. One of the better corners in the league, Rashard Bateman, is it. I know last week he found the end zone in Bateman, but every few weeks he'll have a pop game here and there in Bateman, but not someone who's consistent. We've seen it throughout his career, and he's more of a guy that's just going to stretch the field and obviously spread a defense out a little bit. But in terms of putting up numbers weekly, he's just not there as Bateman. Now to the Chiefs, Xavier Worthy, I thought he was going to play last week. He didn't. This week we'll see if he's going to play in this one for Kansas City. So if he plays, he's a fringe option. And same with Hollywood Brown. This offense, I just feel like not a lot of numbers go around in this offense. Where Mahomes, he's been decent so far this season. The running room, nothing going on really with Pacheco and Kareem Hunt in the backfield. And Tyquan Thornton has taken some away from these guys. So Hollywood Brown and Worthy, they're fringe options. Juju Smith-Schuster and Tyquan Thornton to sit. So Tyquan Thornton, He's been the deep ball threat for Mahomes. They almost hit on 2 touchdowns in last week's game with the New York Giants. And Thornton, with Xavier Worthy back in the lineup, I think his snaps are going to be cut down big time in this ball game. So Thornton, Xavier Worthy doesn't play in this game, then he's someone you can consider in deeper leagues. But still, you have to see more consistency out of Thornton to have him in your lineup. But definitely someone to own in 12-team leagues or deeper. Green Bay Packers at the Cowboys on Sunday night. All these receivers I know really haven't done much, but this Cowboy defense, we just saw them got torched by the Chicago Bears, where all 3 of their wide receivers scored touchdowns in Roma Dunze, DJ Moore, and Luther Birding. So this week, Golden, Romeo Doubs, Latavian Wicks, I don't think anything's off the table in this game where Green Bay goes into Dallas, especially after an embarrassing loss at the Cleveland Browns. And Jordan Love has his way like he did a few years ago in that playoff game. So I'm actually going to have all these receivers fringe options. Now George Pickens, he's going to be operating as the number 1 wide receiver. CeeDee Lamb is going to miss anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks with a high ankle sprain. And George Pickens, the last 2 weeks, he's gone out there and he's been solid with 2 weeks in a row, 17.8 fantasy points and finding the end zone in both ball games. So like I said, now he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver. And I think him and Jake Ferguson, the only 2 guys in this offense, really are going to get peppered with targets now in a ball game where Dallas could be down quickly in this one and have to chase points all day long versus a great defense. Tolbert, Keontae Turpin, they're both sits. These guys still have some plays here and there, and they've been on the Cowboys a couple seasons as Tolbert and Keontae Turpin, but never fantasy options really. Turpin more of a gadget and a trick play type of player, and Jalen Tolbert, he's a slot wide receiver with not much upside. As well, New York Jets at the Miami Dolphins, Gary Wilson, we've seen it, and I've said it a lot. Doesn't matter who the quarterback is. He goes out there and puts up numbers. And last week with Tyrod Taylor, once again, he went out there and had a big game. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, both starts. Tyreek Hill, last 2 weeks now, starting to put up numbers. And we know this Miami offense has been way better over the last few seasons, putting up numbers than it's been on the road. And Jalen Waddle, 2 games in a row, finding the end zone. Even though I don't think his ceiling's that high as Jalen Waddle, this New York Jet defense can't stop anyone. We saw Mike Evans and Ibuka last week have good ball games. We saw the Steelers in week 1, Metcalf, Calvin Austin find the end zone versus New York Jet defense. This week, both these wideouts on Monday night, the first of 2 are start. Cincinnati Bengals and the Broncos to close it out. And the second Monday night game of the week, Jamar Chase is a start. Last week, it was just one of those games. They got blown out. You throw the tape out. Chase only had 5 for 50. But even Chase, doesn't matter the quarterback. He's still going to go out there and put up numbers. Obviously not going to put up the elite numbers like he did last season with Joe Burrow with the backup Jake Browning in there. But still, he's a wideout. It just takes 1 or 2 big plays for him to have a fantasy day. And this week, even with Patrick Surtain most likely on a majority of the game, he's a start. T. Higgins, to me, is a fringe option. T. Higgins, when Joe Burrow hasn't been in the lineup, he hasn't really done much in his NFL career. And last week, he didn't do much as T. Higgins. And also, he's been an injury-prone player on and off. So this week at the Broncos, he's a fringe option. Cortland Sutton to start. A couple weeks ago versus Indianapolis in week 2, he was non-existent. And then last week went over 100 yards, and he found the end zone in that game at the Los Angeles Chargers. So Sutton in this one versus a defense that isn't that good, he's a start. Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims, just into 2 inconsistent young wide receivers. Franklin, we saw the big game in week 2 with Indianapolis, 8 for 89 and a touchdown. And Mims had a touchdown in week 2 as well. And then last week, both these wide receivers couldn't even get 5 fantasy points in PPR leagues. So they're both sits. This week's that's wide receiver start sit every matchup for week 4 of the fantasy football season.